The day my mother handed me a $20 AR bill and told me she'd be back in a month, I was standing on the front porch in my Biera feet. The concrete was hot from the August sun, and I kept shifting my weight from one foot to the other, while she kissed my forehead. Her lipstick left a faint pink mark that I scrubbed off with the back of my hand as soon as she turned around. My father was already in the car with the engine running. And he didn't look at me through the window. He was looking at his phone, his thumbs moving fast, and I remember thinking that he typed like a teenager, even though he was 47. They were going to Europe for 30 days. My mother had been planning this trip for 2 years, cutting out magazine photos of French cafes and Italian coastlines, pasting them into a scrapbook she kept under the bed. She told me I was old enough to stay by myself, that I was a responsible kid, that the neighbors would check on me. Mrs. Patterson from across the hall had promised to bring me casseroles on Mondays and Wednesdays. My mother made me promise to eat vegetables and not just cereal for every meal. I promised, I meant it at the time. The $20 was supposed to be for emergencies. My mother pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. If something really bad happens, you call Auntie May, okay? I nodded. I didn't tell her that Auntie May's number had been disconnected for 6 months, that I'd tried calling it twice and gotten a robotic voice, saying the number was no longer in service. I didn't tell her because she looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that her concealer couldn't quite hide, and because she'd been snapping at my father all week in sharp whispers that stopped whenever I walked into the room. The car pulled away and I watched it turn the corner at the end of our street. The taillights blinked once, twice, and then they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the $20 bill growing damp in my palm. Patterson opened her door and asked if I wanted to come in for some lemonade. I said no thank you and went back inside. The appartement felt bigger without them. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. I opened it and counted 3 eggs, half a carton of milk that expired the next day, and a jar of pickles that had been there since my 8th birthday party. That was the first day. On the 3rd day, I ran out of milk. I walked to the corner store with my $20 AR bill folded into my sock, because I'd seen a movie once where a girl got her wallet stolen and I wasn't taking any chances. The store was small and smelled like floor cleaner and old bread. I picked up a carton of milk and a loaf of sandwich bread and a box of instant noodles. The cashier rang it up and said $4.37. I handed him my 20 and he gave me back $15.63 in a little pile of coins and wrinkled ones. I put the change in a Ziploc bag and hid it under my mattress when I got home. That night I ate instant noodles straight from the pot and watched a rerun of some COO King show where a lady made a 3-tier cake that looked like a castle. My stomach growled, but I was too full of noodles to eat anything else. I turned off the TV at 9 o'clock and brushed my teeth with water because we were almost out of toothpaste. My mother had left a list of emergency numbers on the fridge, but all of them were crossed out except for Auntie May's, and that one was useless. On the 5th day, I woke up with a sore throat. I drank water and ate a piece of bread and told myself it was nothing. By noon I had a fever and my head felt like someone had filled it with cotton. I lay on the couch and watched the ceiling fan spin, counting the rotations until I lost track at 240 something. I thought about calling my mother, but I didn't have the international code, and she'd told me not to call unless it was a real emergency. A fever didn't count, she said that. Fever is not an emergency, Lin Xiaoman. You drink water and you rest. So I rested. The knock on the door came at 6 in the evening. I dragged myself off the couch and looked through the peephole. The person on the other side was stretched wrong, and I couldn't see their face clear. I opened the door a crack. It was a woman in a yellow dress. The kind of yellow that hurt your eyes, bright and synthetic like plastic flowers. Her hair was curled perfectly, and she was holding a glossy shopping bag with a gold string. She said, looking down at me like I was a stain on her floor. You're the kid. I said nothing. My throat hurt too much to speak. Your father told me you'd be here alone, she said. He said you were self-sufficient. She said it like it was a joke, like the idea of a child being self-sufficient was something she found funny. She stepped closer and I caught a whiff of perfume, something floral and sharp that made my head ache worse. I just came by to drop something off. He left his watch at my place. She held up the shopping bag. You should lock your door, you know. It's not safe to open it for strangers. I closed the door. I locked it, turned the deadbolt, and slid the chain across. I leaned against the wood and listened to her heels click away down the hallway. The sound faded and I was alone again. I looked at the carton of milk on the counter and thought about how it had expired 2 days ago, but I'd been drinking it anyway, because I didn't want to waste money. I poured the rest down the sink and watched the white swirl disappear into the drain. On the 8th day, I found the wedding invitation. I'd been looking for a pen to write down how much money I had left, which was getting harder to keep track of, because I'd spent more than I planned on some cough drops and a box of tissues. I opened every drawer in the appartement, and in the bottom drawer of my father's desk, buried under old receipts and expired coupons, I found a cream-colored envelope. I pulled it out and opened it, and I read the words inside twice before they made sense. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Lin Jiangguo and So Wangqing, Saturday the 24th of August, the Grand Hyatt Hotel, 3rd floor ballroom. I sat on the floor with the invitation in my lap and counted how many days my PA rents had been gone. 8. They'd been gone 8 days and my father was already getting a ride. To the woman in the yellow dress. To the woman who looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. I folded the invitation and put it back in the drawer. I closed the drawer and sat there for a while, my back against the desk, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there for as long as I could remember. I was still sitting there when the police knocked. It was the 13th day. I know because I'd been rocking the calendar on the fridge with little X. One for each day they'd been gone. I was counting my change on the couch. Pennies and nickels and dimes spread out on the cushion like a treasure map. I had $19.20 left. I was figuring out if I could make it last another 17 days, when the red and blue lights started flashing through the curtains. They painted the walls in stripes, first red then blue then red again, and I thought for a second that someone was having a party in the parking lot. Then the knocking started. 3 hard knocks, then 3 more. I opened the door to 2 police officers, 1 man and 1 woman. They stood in the hallway with their hands at their sides, their faces professional and blank. The hallway light had been broken for a week and I'd been too red to tell anyone, so their faces were half lit and half shadowed. Lin Xiaoman, the woman asked. I nodded. I'm Officer Chen and this is Officer Zhao. Are you alone here? I nodded again. I didn't trust my voice. She crouched down so she was eye level with me. I could see the lines around her eyes, and the way her ponytail was pulled tight enough to stretch her temples. I need you to stay calm, okay? Your PA rents were detained in France. They're being held for questioning in connection with an illegal gambling operation. I heard the words but they didn't stick. They rolled off me like water off a plastic umbrella. I looked past her at the other officer. The man, who was writing something in a small notepad. Ray, they coming back? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Officer Chen's mouth tightened. Right now, we don't know. Do you have any family we can contact? Aunts, uncles, grandparents? I thought about it. My grandmother died 2 years ago. My grandfather remarried and moved to Florida, and I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. My mother's sister, Auntie May, had changed her number and no one had told me why. I shook my head. Just my little aunt, but her phone doesn't work. Officer Zhao stopped writing and looked at me. What about neighbors? Someone who can stay with you? Ms. Patterson from across the hall, but she's old and she has a bad hip. The 2 officers exchanged a look. Officer Chen reached out and touched my shoulder. We'll figure something out, okay? For now, you need to get your things. We're going to take you to a temporary shelter. I pulled away from her hand. I'm not leaving, Lin Xiaoman. I'm not leaving. I stepped back into the apartment. I have money, I have food. I'm fine here. I held up my hand and showed them the pile of change on the couch. See, I counted it. I have enough. Officer Chen looked at the coins and then back at me, and something in her face shifted. She stood up straight and looked at Officer Zhao, who shrugged. We can't leave her alone, she said. She's 11. I'm 11 and a half, I said. And I've been alone for 13 days. I'm fine. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, show me your kitchen. Show me you have food. I led them into the kitchen and opened the cabinets. 2 boxes of instant noodles, a jar of peanut butter, half a loaf of bread, and 3 packs of crackers. I opened the refrigerator and showed them the water bottles and the carton of eggs I'd bought 2 days ago. See? I'm fine. Officer Chen looked at Officer Zhao again. He sighed and put his notepad away. We'll do a welfare check every day, he said. And we'll contact child services in the morning, but for tonight. He trailed off. Officer Chen crouched down again. You're brave, she said. But you shouldn't have to be. Do you understand that? You shouldn't have to be this brave at 11 years old. I nodded even though I didn't fully understand. I understood that my PA rents were in trouble in a country I'd only seen in pictures. I understood that my father was riding a woman in a yellow dress, while my mother was probably sitting in some French police station. I understood that I had $19 and 20 cents and 17 days left to figure out what to do. After they left, I closed the door and locked it, and leaned against it, just like I had after the woman in the yellow dress left. My head still hurt, and my throat was still scratchy and I was hungry, but I didn't feel like eating. I went back to the couch and sat among the coins. And I looked at them and thought about how small they were. How little they weighed in my hand. That night I found the iron box in my mother's closet. I'd been looking for a blanket, because the nights were getting colder, and my mother's winter stuff was in the top shelf. I dragged a chair into the closet and climbed up, and my hand hit something metal. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside were keys, a bank card, and a photograph. The photograph was of my mother and another woman, arms around each other, holding up glasses of red wine. They were laughing at the camera, teeth showing, eyes crinkled. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it said, May, 2019 Auntie May. Before she disappeared, read, the keys had a tag that said Safe Deposit Box C, Ping An Bank. The bank CR was in my mother's name. I put everything back in the box and closed the lid and sat on the floor in the dark closet with the box in my lap. I thought about the $20 my mother had given me, and how she'd pressed it into my palm, and closed my fingers around it. I thought about how she'd said it was for emergencies, how this seemed like an emergency, or maybe it wasn't, maybe the real emergency was still coming, maybe I hadn't hit the bottom yet. I slept on the floor of the closet that night, I don't know why. The box was under my head like a pillow, and I remember thinking that it was uncomfortable, and that I should go back to my bed, but I didn't move. I just lay there, and listened to the sounds of the appartement settling around me, the creaks and groans of a place that had never felt so empty. In the morning I took a shower and brushed my teeth and put on clean clothes. I took the bank card and the keys out of the box and put them in my pocket. I walked to the bank and I stood in line behind 3 people, and I watched the teller's face when I handed her the card. She asked me for the PIN and I tried my mother's birthday. It didn't work. I tried my father's birthday. It didn't work. I tried my own birthday. December 25, 1925. The screen flickered and the balance popped up, $52,000. I read at the number until the teller asked me what I wanted to do. I asked her to withdraw $20. She blinked and asked me to confirm. She counted out 3 5s and 5 1s and slid them across the counter. I put the money in my pocket with the other $19 and 20 cents, and I walked out of the bank into the sun. I walked past the grocery store, and I looked at the eggs in the window and I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had more money than I'd ever had in my life, and it felt heavier than the $20 my mother had given me. Everything felt heavier now, the sky, the air, the weight of all those coins in my pocket. I walked until my legs hurt, and I sat down on a bus stop bench and put my head in my hands. A boy with a gray hoodie was sitting on the other end of the bench. He had headphones on and he was looking at me. I looked back. He pulled one earbud out and offered it to me. I shook my head. He shrugged and put it back in. After a while, he leaned over and said, "You look like you're having a rough day." I didn't answer. He pulled the earbud out again. "Ear," he said, "listen to it. Always makes me feel better." I took the earbud and put it in my ear. It was jazz saxophone, slow and sad. I listened to the whole song without saying anything, and when it was over, I handed the earbud back. "Thanks," I said. He smiled. "No problem. I'm Chen Yu. By the way," I said my name. He nodded like he already knew it, which was impossible. We sat on the bench for a while longer and then I stood up and walked back toward my apartment. I didn't look back. I felt his eyes on me the whole way, but I didn't look back. I walked into my building and up the stairs, and I stopped outside my door. Mrs. Patterson's door was cracked open. She was watching me through the gap, her eye visible in the sliver of light. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked. I said I was fine. She said okay and closed her door. I opened mine and I went inside and I closed it. I went to the kitchen and I boiled water for noodles. I ate them standing up at the counter, stuttering at the calendar on the fridge. 13x17 to go. I didn't know if my mother would come back. I didn't know if my father was really getting a ride. I didn't know anything except that I had $19.40 in my pocket, and a bank card with more money than I could spend, and a photograph of my mother laughing with a woman who'd changed her phone number and disappeared that night. I called the number on the back of the photograph. It took me 3 tries to dial it right because my hands were shaking. The phone rang 4 times and then a voice answered. It was scratchy and tired. "Hello, Auntie May?" There was a long silence. Then the voice said, "Yeah," I said, and I started to cry. I hadn't cried the whole time, not when the cops came, not when the woman in the yellow dress told me to lock my door, not when I found the wedding invitation, but I cried then, sitting on the kitchen floor with the phone pressed to my ear, and I told Auntie May everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Your mother told me she might not come back. She said if anything happened, I should help you." "Help me do what?" "Help you survive," she said. "Help you figure out who you can trust and who you can't. Stay rotting with your father." "What about him?" she sighed. "Your father's been stealing from your mother's business for 2 years. The woman he's marrying was her accountant. They've been working together. Your mother found out and she had to leave." I looked at the ceiling, at that same water stain. "She didn't tell me." "Of course she didn't," Auntie May said. "She wanted to protect you. She left me alone with $20. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, $20 was the code. She knew you'd open the box if you got desperate enough. She knew you'd find the bank card and the keys. She knew you'd call me. She planned it, Lynn. She planned everything." I closed my eyes. "Even my father getting a ride." "No," Auntie May said. "She didn't plan that. He did that on his own. And now you get to decide what you do about it." I opened my eyes and looked at the calendar on the fridge. 17 days left. I looked at the pile of change on the couch where I'd left it. I looked at the wedding invitation still sitting in my father's drawer, and I made a decision. "Auntie May," I said, "help me crash a wedding." The next morning I pulled my mother's desktop computer out of the closet and plugged it in. The screen flickered and whined, but it turned on. I sat in her office chair, which was too high for me, so I had to sit on the edge, and I typed my father's name into the bar. The results came back slow because the internet was bad in our building, but I waited. I scrolled through a page of old business listings and an alumni association newsletter from Artianins Sir. Then I found it, a business registration for a company called Jianggu Imports. I clicked through and found the address, the same one as my mother's wine distribution Nubby house. I copied the address onto a scrap of paper and kept searching. The name came up on a professional networking site with a photo I barely recognized. She had different hair, a different smile, like she'd reinvented herself. The profile said she worked as an accountant for a small food and beverage company. I checked the company name. It was the same as my mother's old business, the one she'd closed down a year ago. I sat back in the chair and stared at the screen. Auntie May had told me the truth, but seeing it in black and white made it real. My father and his new fiancée had been working together longer than anyone knew. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen. I ate a piece of bread with peanut butter and drank a glass of water. I counted my money again, including the 20 I'd taken from the bank. Now I had $39.20. It felt like a fortune and a curse all at once. I opened my mother's calendar that was still hanging on the wall by the phone. She'd rocked the wedding date in red pen. August. I looked at the date on my phone. August. I had 13 days to figure out what I was going to do. Auntie May called me at noon. She said she'd been thinking about what I asked her the night before, the part about crashing the wedding, and she had an idea. "Your mother's wine company, the one she started before your father took over. I still have access to some of the old accounts." I sat on the floor with the phone pressed to my ear. "What good does that do?" "The wine they're serving at the wedding," she said, It's from your mother's old stock. I know because the distributor is a friend of mine. They're selling it to your father at a steep discount, because it's technically still in your mother's name. I didn't understand at first. So they're using stolen goods to fund a wedding, Auntie May said. And I have the paperwork to prove it. I felt something stir in my chest. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. What do I do with the paperwork? Auntie May laughed, a dry crackling sound. You don't do anything with it, you give it to someone who does. She paused. Young guy, just finished his training. He owes me a favor from a case we worked on together. I'll send him your way. Wait, I said. What does a cop have to do with this? Your father's business practices aren't exactly legal. Lynn? The man's been trafficking counterfeit wine under your mother's label. That's smuggling. That's more than just a messy divorce. She sighed. The woman he's mummy-rying was his accomplice. She's been helping him launder the money. I've got bank statements, wire transfers, the whole paper trail. I looked out the window at the fire escape. A pigeon was perched on the railing. Cooing softly, Auntie May, I said. Is my mother going to jail too? The silence stretched. I don't think so, she said finally. Your mother was Smay. She kept everything clean. She found out about the scheme and she rotted documenting it, building a case. That's why she left. She couldn't stay here while they were still running things. So she ran away to France. She ran to buy time. Auntie May said. She was going to come back with enough evidence to take them down. But she underestimated how fast they'd move to cut her out. I pressed my forehead against the window glass. The pigeon fluttered away. What do I do now? You wait, Auntie May said. I'll send the cop to you tomorrow. He'll know how to handle it. In the meantime, don't talk to your father. Don't talk to anyone about what you know. You just lie low and stay safe. I hung up and sat in the sunbeam that was coming through the window. The dust motes swirled around me like tiny galaxies. I watched them for a long time. That night I had a dream. In the dream, my mother was standing at the front door of our apartment. We were wearing the same clothes she'd left in, holding a suitcase. She knocked, but when I opened the door, she wasn't there. I walked out into the hallway and the lights were all broken and everything was dark, and I called her name but no one answered. I woke up sweating, my heart thumping like a fist against my ribs. I lay there staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next day I took a shower and put on my cleanest shirt. I brushed my hair and pulled it into a ponytail. I sat by the window and waited. At 10 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I stood up and opened the door before the knock came. It was the boy in the gray hoodie from the bus stop. I stared at him, he stared back. You're the cop, I asked. His mouth twisted into a half smile. Rookie cop, he said. Still in training? He held out his hand. Shen Yu, I think we met the other day. I shook his hand. His palm was warm and dry. Auntie May sent you. She said you had some information about an ongoing investigation. He stepped inside when I motioned for him to. He looked around the apartment with quick, assessing. At the water stain on the ceiling, at the faded couch, at the pile of coins still sitting on the cushion. You've been living here alone. For 2 weeks, I said. My parents are in France. I could see him doing the math. The apartment was small, the furniture was old, and I was just a kid in a too big shirt. But he didn't say anything about it. He just nodded and pulled out a notepad. Tell me about the investigation. So I told him everything. I told him about my father's business and my mother's wine, and the wedding invitation. I told him about the woman in the yellow dress and the bank account with $52,000. I told him about the stolen wine and the forged documents, and the way my mother had planned everything before she left. Chen Yu wrote it all down without interrupting. When I finished, he looked up and said, That's a lot I know, I said. Are you sure about all of it? He looked me in the eye. Because if I take this to my supervisors, I need to be sure. I thought about it. Then I went to my mother's closet, and pulled out the iron box. I opened it, and took out the photograph of my mother with Auntie May. I flipped it over and looked at the date, Then I took the bank card and the keys and showed them to Chen Yu. The bank account is in my mother's name. The safety deposit box is at Ping An Bank. I haven't opened it yet, but Auntie May said there's evidence in there. Chen Yu looked at the card and the keys for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll open a case file, but I need you to do something for me. What? Stay out of it, he said. If this is as big as I think it is, these people are dangerous. Your father, his new wife, whoever else is involved. They won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're a threat. I looked at him. He was young, maybe 22 or 23. His face was kind but his eyes were serious. I believed him. What about the wedding? I asked. Has getting right in 12 days. I know. He put his notepad back in his pocket. I'll talk to my team. We'll figure out a plan. After he left, I sat on the couch and picked up the pile of coins. I counted them again even though I'd already counted them a dozen times. I knew every single coin in that pile, how much it weighed, what year it was minted. The coins felt like the only things in the world I could control. I put them back in the Ziploc bag and hid it under my mattress. That evening, someone knocked on the door. I froze in the kitchen with a half-eaten cracker in my hand. The knocking came again, louder this time. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Mrs. Patterson was standing there, her face pressed close to the door. She had a casserole dish in her hands. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. You haven't eaten properly in days, have you? She pushed her way inside, her orthopedic shoes squeaking on the linoleum. She set the casserole dish on the counter and peeled back the foil. It was chicken and rice, steaming and fragrant. I can see it in your face. You're too pale. I didn't know what to say. Thank you, Patterson. Call me Claire, she said. I've been watching you through the door, and I know you've been alone. I saw the police a few nights ago. She settled onto the couch with a groan and looked around the room. Where are your parents? Really, I sat down across from her. France, she repeated. For how long? A month. The word sounded strange coming out of my mouth. A month, it had been so long already. Claire stared at me for a long moment. Her face was wrinkled and tired but her eyes were sharp. That's not right, she said. Leaving a child alone for a month. That's not right no matter how you slice it. My mom had a lot going on, I said. It sounded like an excuse even to me. Your mom, Claire said slowly, is a good woman. I've known her for 6 years and I've never had a bad word to say about her. But I also know that your father is a snake. She shook her head. I saw him with that woman, the one in the yellow dress. I saw them in the parking lot 2 weeks before they left. I sat for RD. What did they do? Nothing, Claire said. They were just talking. But the way they were standing, close together, not like two people who just met. They knew each other. She leaned back and sighed. I didn't want to say anything because it wasn't my place, but you're just a child. And someone should be looking out for you. I didn't know what to say to that. I just thanked her for the casserole and saw her to the door. After she left, I ate half of the chicken and rice standing up at the counter. The food was warm and comforting, and I realized I hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I picked it up and saw an unknown number. I answered with a tentative hello. A woman's voice. Familiar, but I couldn't place it. It's Sue Wonking. The voice was calm. I have something I want to discuss with you. My hand tightened on the phone. How did you get my number? Your father gave it to me. She paused. I know you found the wedding invitation. I also know you've been making some phone calls. Talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. I said nothing. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. Don't do anything stupid, she said. Your father and I are getting right in 11 days. That's going to happen, no matter what you try to do, she paused. I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying this to protect you. Stay out of things that don't concern you. You're the one who doesn't concern me, I said. You're just someone my father is using. She laughed. It was a brittle sound. Is that what you think? Your father is the one being used. I've got documents that will put him away for years. Another pause. And I've got documents that will put your mother away too, so be careful who you trust. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the middle of my living room with the phone still pressed to my ear, even though the line was dead. I thought about what she'd said. She had documents, she had leverage. She wasn't just some woman my father was marrying, she was the one pulling the strings. And she knew I'd been talking to Auntie May. She knew I was making moves. I called Chen Yu. He answered on the first ring. I said, Sue Wonking. She knows everything. I told him what she'd said, word for word. He listened silently and then said, Did she threaten you? She said she'd put my mother away. She's bluffing. His voice was steady. We've been reviewing the evidence. She doesn't have anything on your mother. It's all projection, trying to scare you. It's working, I admitted. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Look, I can't make any promises, but I can tell you this. We're moving faster than she thinks. We've already rotted building a case. The wedding is still going to happen, but we're gonna have our people there. What does that mean? It means I'll be there, he said. And I'm going to make sure nothing happens to you. I hung up and sat on the floor of my empty appartement. The sun was coming through the window, dewy and bright, everything looked normal. My mother's calendar on the wall, my father's desk in the corner, the pile of coins hidden under the mattress. But nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be normal again, and for some reason, that thought didn't scare me as much as it should have. The days after Su Wangqing's call blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the streetlight flickers, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant sound of cars passing on the wet road. My mind ran in circles, replaying her words, her calm voice, the way she'd laughed when she said my father was the one being used. I kept turning it over in my head, trying to find the cracks in what she'd said, but the cracks just led to more questions. Chen Yu came by every afternoon. He'd knock 3 times, wait for me to open the door, and then walk in like he owned the place. He never brought food, but he always checked the fridge and the cabinets, making sure I was eating. He asked the same questions every time. Had I heard from my mother? Had anyone else called? Had I left the appartement? The answers were always no. I'd stopped going out except for emergencies. The corner store was too far now. I was down to instant noodles and crackers, and I was rotting to feel it in my bones. This hollow ache that hunger left behind. On the 5th day after Su Wangqing's call, Chen Yu came with a folder tucked under his arm. He sat at the kitchen table and spread out the contents. Photographs, bank statements, a list of names and dates. I looked at them without touching them. The photographs showed my father in a Wulleri house, shaking hands with men I didn't recognize. There were boxes of wine stacked behind them, the same label my mother had used for her business. The bank statements were covered in numbers that blurred together, transactions and transfers and red circles that someone had drawn in pen. Your father is at the center of a smuggling operation, Chen Yu said. He's been importing counterfeit wine under your mother's label for 3 years. The woman he's marrying, Su Wangqing, she's been doing his books. She's the one who made it look legitimate. He tapped a photograph. We have enough evidence to bring them in, but there's a catch. I looked at him. What catch? We can't move until the wedding. He said it like it was a simple fact. The way you'd say the sun rose in the east. We need both of them together, in a public place. The wedding is our best shot. I stared at him. You want me to go to the wedding? I want you to stay safe. He leaned forward. But I also want you to think about what happens after. Your mother is coming back, Xiamen. She's flying in the day before the wedding. She's going to want to see you. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother coming back. I'd been so focused on surviving, on counting days and dollars and threats, that I'd pushed the thought of her return to the back of my mind. Now it surfaced warm and terrifying. She's really coming. She got cleared, Chen Yu said. The French authorities dropped the charges. She's flying into the city on the 23rd. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just sat there and let the information settle into my bones. My mother was coming back. My father was getting married. And I was supposed to show up at the wedding like none of it mattered. The day before the wedding, I walked to the bank. I took the keys to the safety deposit box out of my pocket, and I handed them to the teller. She led me to a small room with a metal door, and she opened the box for me. Inside was a stack of papers, neatly organized in a folder. I took the folder out and sat on the bench in the waiting area and read through everything. There were letters from my mother's lawyer, emails between my father and Su Wangqing, receipts for wine shipments that didn't match the records. And there was a letter in my mother's handwriting, addressed to me. I opened it with trembling hands. The ink was smudged in places, like she'd written it in a hurry. Xiamen, if you're reading this, I'm not coming back, not right away. I've left you the keys to the safety deposit box, because I need you to take the evidence inside to someone you can trust. Someone who will do the right thing. The letter went on to explain everything, the smuggling, the lies, the years of planning. It ended with, I'm sorry I had to leave you. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver. But I'm doing this so you can have a future that doesn't involve running. I love. I'll find my way back to you. I folded the letter and put it back in the folder. I stayed on the bench for a long time after that, staring at the wall, not seeing anything. When I finally got up to leave, the teller asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. The words felt hollow, but she nodded and let me go. I walked home through the rain. The water soaked through my shoes and plastered my hair to my forehead. I didn't mind, the cold felt good, like it was washing something away. I passed the bus stop where I'd first met Chen Yu and I stopped for a moment, just standing there. I thought about how different everything was now. How I'd gone from a kid waiting for her PA rents, to come back to someone with a folder full of evidence and a plan. I wondered if I was ready. I didn't think I was, but I also didn't think I had a choice. When I got back to the appartement, there was an envelope taped to my door. I peeled it off and opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation, the same one I'd found in my father's desk. But this one had a handwritten note on the back. You should come, I'll save you a seat. It was signed with a looping S. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Then I took it out again and smoothed it flat. I read it one more time. The handwriting was elegant, almost beautiful. I could picture her writing it, her perfect nails gripping the pen, her lips curved into that cold smile. I put the note in my pocket and went inside. The night before the wedding was the longest night of my life. I packed a small bag with a change of clothes and the folder of evidence. I checked and rechecked that I had everything. I lay in bed and read at the clock, watching the numbers change, wondering what the morning would bring. I didn't sleep at all. At 5 in the morning, I got up and took a long shower. I put on the only dress I owned, a plain blue thing my mother had bought me for a school play 2 years ago. It was short on me now, my ankles being cold. I walked to the hotel alone. The Grand Hyatt was a gleaming tower of glass and steel that rose above the city like a monument to everything I'd never had. I stood across the street and watched the cars pull up to the entrance, women in expensive dresses, men in tailored suits. The doormen held umbrellas over them as they stepped out, and I watched them disappear into the revolving doors. I waited until the first wave of guests had arrived, and then I crossed the street. The lobby was all marble and chandeliers, and I felt like a ghost walking through it. The wedding was on the 3rd floor. The sign said, "In the grand ballroom." I took the elevator up with a group of strangers. No one looked at me. I didn't exist to them. Just another face, just someone's plus one. The ballroom was enormous, bigger than I'd ever imagined. There were round tables draped in white cloth and centerpieces of white roses that reached up like frozen hands. A stage at the front was decorated with more roses and fairy lights, and a flower arch that looked like it was holding its breath. I found a seat in the back, near the doors, where I could watch everything without being too visible. People started filing in. They sat at their assigned tables, laughed and talked and poured themselves champagne. I watched them all, their shiny shoes and their reeful smiles, and I thought about how none of them knew what was about to happen. How they'd come to celebrate a marriage that was built on lies and stolen wine, and a man who'd abandoned his daughter with $20 and no running. And then the music started, a piano, slow and romantic. I saw my father walk to the stage, his face flushed with happiness, his suit so it looked like it had been painted on. He took his place under the flower arch and he smiled at the crowd. And then the doors at the other end of the room swung open, so Wang Qing entered. She was wearing a white dress that hugged her like it had been sewn onto her body. Her hair was up in a twist of curls and diamonds, and she walked toward my father like she was floating on air. Her train swept across the floor behind her, a trail of fabric that looked like liquid silk. I watched her approach the stage, and I thought about how beautiful she was, how perfect she looked. And I thought about how she was only perfect because she'd stolen it all, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. My father reached out his hand to her. She took it. The officiant began to speak, words about love and commitment and forever. I stopped listening. My hand was in my pocket, gripping the folder of evidence. My other hand was on the phone, ready to call Chen Yu. I just needed a signal, just a sign that it was time. And then Wang Qing stopped the officiant. She turned to face the crowd, her smile wide and white. "Before we proceed," she said, "I have an announcement." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "There's someone here today who I think deserves special recognition." Her eyes scanned the room and then they landed on me. "Nah, would you come up here please?" I froze. The entire room turned to look at me. I felt their eyes on my too short dress and my too thin frame. I felt the weight of 100 strangers staring at me, but I also felt something else, a spark of anger that burned through the fear. I stood up and walked toward the stage. Su Wonking was still smiling when I reached the front. She held out her hand to me and I took it. Her grip was cool and firm. "This is my stepdaughter," she said to the crowd. "She's been through a lot this month. Her mother left for Europe and never came back." She paused, letting the words sink in, "But she's been so brave. So I wanted to honor her today." I wanted to pull my hand away but I couldn't. I felt like I was trapped. Like everyone was watching and waiting for me to do something. I looked at my father. His face was a mask of confusion, his smile frozen in place. I looked at Su Wonking. Her smile was a knife wrapped in satin. And then the doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. I heard the commotion before I saw it. The sound of heavy boots on marble and voices shouting. The crowd turned, a wave of murmurs and gasps. Police officers flooded into the ballroom, their uniforms stark against the white and gold. At the front of them was Chen Yu. He walked straight toward my father. "Lin Zhongguo," he said, holding up a badge. "You're under arrest for smuggling and fraud." He glanced at Su Wonking. "And you're under arrest for accessory to the same." My father's face went white. He tried to back away but another officer grabbed his arm. Su Wongking's smile didn't waver. She just stood there, perfectly poised, like she'd been expecting this all along. "You can't arrest me," she said. "I have diplomatic immunity." She said it so calmly, so confidently, that I almost believed her. Chen Yu didn't blink. "No you don't. That's not how diplomatic immunity works." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You're coming with us." The room erupted into chaos. People stood up. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices rose in a tide of confusion and alarm. I stood on the stage, frozen in the middle of it all. I watched my father being led away, his shoulders slumped, his face gray. I watched Su Wonking being handcuffed, her perfect dress and perfect hair still perfect, even as they pulled her from the ballroom. Chen Yu turned to look at me. He walked up to the stage and stood in front of me, blocking the crowd's view. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my eyes burning. "You did it," he said quietly. "You did exactly what you needed to do." I shook my head. She was going to say something. I don't know what, but she was going to say something. "It doesn't matter now." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "She's not going to hurt anyone ever again." I stood there for a long time, looking out at the empty ballroom, the abandoned champagne glasses and the half-eaten cake and the flower roach that still looked like it was holding its breath. Chen Yu stayed with me, silent and steady. I realized then that he wasn't just a cop doing his job. He was someone who saw red, someone who'd shown up when it mattered most. And in that moment, surrounded by ruin and quiet, and the strange weight of everything that had happened, I realized that the girl who'd been left with $20 and no hope was gone. She'd been replaced by someone who had fought her way through the wreckage and come out the other side. I didn't know who that person was yet, but for the first time in a long time, I was curious to find out. The hotel lobby was empty when I finally walked out. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers like they'd been polished to a mirror shine, and I could see my own reflection in them. A small girl in a too short blue dress with smudged mascara under her eyes. I hadn't even worn mascara. I didn't own any. I was just tired enough that the shadows under my eyes looked like makeup. I stepped outside into the rain and I didn't see a ray that I was getting wet. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the police cars drive away, their lights flashing red and blue against the gray sky, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, not just a hollow quiet where everything used to be. I didn't know where I was going. I just put one foot in front of the other, and let my legs carry me through the streets. The rain soaked through my dress and my shoes and my hair, and I was cold down to my bones, but I didn't stop. I walked past the grocery store where I'd bought eggs that first week. I walked past the bank where I'd opened the safety deposit box. I walked past the bus stop where I'd met Chen Yu. And I stopped there for a minute, just standing under the awning, watching the water stream off the edge in a curtain. A car pulled up, a black sedan Maroc, with tinted windows. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a simple gray coat and her hair was cut short, a style I'd never seen on her before. She looked older, thinner, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered, but I knew her. I would have known her anywhere. My mother. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at me. The rain was still falling, but neither of us moved. We just stood there, maybe 10 feet apart, staring at each other like we were seeing ghosts. Her face crumpled first. She took a step forward, then another, and then she was running toward me, her heels splashing through puddles, her arms already reaching out. She grabbed me and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. I didn't feel. I buried my face in her shoulder and I finally let myself cry. I cried like I hadn't cried in weeks, months, maybe ever. I cried until I was shaking, until I couldn't tell the rain from the tears. She was crying too. I could feel her body heaving against mine, could hear the wet, ragged sounds she was making. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry." I'm so sorry." I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay. But I didn't pull away either. I just held on until the shaking stopped. She took me back to the apartment. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember walking up the stairs or unlocking the door. I just remember waking up on the couch with a blanket over me and the smell of something cooking in the kitchen. My mother was at the stove, stirring a pot. The apartment looked different. She'd cleaned. The dishes were washed and put away. The pile of coins was gone from the couch. There were flowers on the counter, cheap ones from the corner store, white and pink and slightly wilted. She turned when she heard me move and smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "You're awake," she said. "I'm making soup. You need to eat something." I sat up and wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. "When did you get back?" "Last night. I flew in on the red eye. I came straight to the hotel. I saw the whole thing." She set down her spoon and came over to sit beside me. "I saw you up there, standing next to her, not backing down." She reached out and tucked a strand of wet hair behind my ear. "You were so brave." I couldn't believe it. "I didn't feel brave," I said. "I felt like I was going to throw up." She laughed. A sound that cracked in the middle like old wood. "That's what brave feels like, being scared and doing it anyway." We sat in silence for a long moment. The soup bubbled on the stove. Rain tapped against the window. Everything felt strange and familiar at the same time, like I was seeing my own life from a distance. "I'm sorry I left you," my mother said finally. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I got far enough away, they'd leave you alone. But I was wrong. I should have stayed. I should have fought." "There wasn't anything you could do," I said. "They would have hurt you, maybe." She shrugged. "But I should have been here. I should have been the one standing up there, not you." I looked at her. Her face was older, her eyes sadder, but she was still my mother. Still the woman who'd pressed $20 into my palm and told me she'd be back. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." She hugged me again, and this time I hugged her back. The days after the wedding were a blur of phone calls and legal meetings and people in suits coming to the apartment to ask questions. My mother handled most of it. She sat at the kitchen table with lawyers and detectives and explained everything. The documents she'd gathered, the proof she'd collected, the years of planning that had led to that moment. I sat in the corner and listened. I didn't understand half of the words they used, but I understood the shape of it. My father was going to prison, So Wong-King was going to prison, and my mother was going to be free. Auntie May came to visit on the third day. She was shorter than I remembered, with gray streaked hair and a voice that rasped like sandpaper. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "You did good, kid," she said. "You did real good." "I just followed the plan," I said. "The plan wouldn't have worked without you." She pulled back and looked me up and down. "You've got your mother's spine, stubborn as a mule. The both of you." I didn't know whether to take that as a compliment. I decided to take it as one. Chen Yu came by that evening. He was off duty. We ring the same gray hoodie I'd first seen him in, jeans and sneaker. He looked different outside of his uniform, younger, almost like a normal person. My mother opened the door and invited him in. She served him tea and he sat on the couch and told us the latest updates. My father had been transferred to the county jail pending trial, so Wong-King was being held without bail. The case was bigger than they'd originally thought, involving at least 5 other people and a network that stretched across 3 states. "And your mother is in the clear," he said. "She provided all the documentation we needed." The judge was very impressed with the quality of her evidence. My mother smiled. "I had good sources," Chen Yu said. "I know. She's been helping me on the side too." He looked at me. "And your daughter, she was the one who held it all together." I felt my face get hot. I looked at the floor. I didn't do anything special. You stayed alive, my mother said. You kept your head. You followed through on a plan that most adults couldn't have managed. She reached out and squeezed my hand. You're exceptional, Xiaomin. I want you to know that. After Chen Yu left, my mother and I sat in the living room and watched the rain stop. The sky clay red and the moon came out, pale and silver through the window. We sat in silence for a while, just being together. It felt strange to have her back, to know that the appartement wasn't empty anymore. I kept expecting her to disappear, to leave again, but she stayed. She made dinner, and she cleaned the bathroom, and she ironed her work clothes for the next day. Small, ordinary things that made everything feel real. You're going back to work? I asked. She nodded. The business is still there. I need to clean up the mess your father left behind, but it's mine now. All of it. What about the money? What money? The money in the bank, the 52,000. My mother looked at me. That was your father's. I put it there as a trap. Once the court cases are over, it'll go back to the victims. I nodded. I didn't really understand, but I didn't need to. I just needed to know that everything was going to be okay. And looking at my mother, at the way she moved through the appartement with a purpose I hadn't seen in years, I believed it would be. A week passed. Then too. My mother went to work every day and I went back to school. It was weird to be around other kids again, to sit in a classroom and pretend that everything was normal. No one knew what had happened. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept my head down and did my homework and ate lunch alone. Chen Yu started coming to dinner every Friday night. My mother would cook something elaborate, a stir fry or a curry or a pot roast, and the three of us would eat at the kitchen table. He'd tell us funny stories from his training, and my mother would tell him about her days at work, and I'd watch them from across the table and feel something spreading through my chest. It wasn't a feeling I had words for, not yet. It was just there, steady and quiet, like the hum of the refrigerator. One night, Chen Yu stayed late. My mother had already gone to bed, and it was just the two of us sitting on the couch. The TV was on but muted, some old movie playing in the background. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I asked. Nothing, he said. I was just thinking about that day, the bus. You look so I was lost, I said. I didn't know what I was doing. You figured it out. With your help. He smiled. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did all the heavy lifting. I didn't know what to say to that. I looked at the TV and watched the actors move their mouths without making any noise. Are you going to keep coming to dinner? I asked. He laughed. Do you want me to? I didn't answer right away. I thought about it. I thought about the way his presence made the appartement feel less empty. The way he'd shown up when I needed him most and hadn't left. Yeah, I said finally. I think I'd like that. He nodded. Then I'll keep coming. And he did. He came every Friday, and then sometimes on Wednesdays too. And then one Saturday my mother asked if he wanted to help us move the couch into a better position, and he said yes, and suddenly he was just there. Part of the apartment, part of our lives. I didn't question it, I just accepted it. The way you accept the sun rising in the morning. A year, my mother put the appartement up for sale. She said we needed a fresh air, a place without bad memories. I didn't a word. I helped her pack up all our things, and I found the $20 bill tucked inside a dictionary on the top shelf of the bookcase. I held it in my hands, this crumpled piece of paper that had once represented everything I had in the world. Now it was just a reminder, a symbol of a time that was over. I folded it and put it in my pocket. I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell anyone. I just kept it with me, the way you keep a scar you've healed from. Not because you want to remember the pain, but because you want to remember that you survived. We moved to a smaller place on the other side of the city. It was a new building with clean hallways and a courtyard where kids played. My mother painted my room light blue, the color I'd always wanted. I hung up a poster of a jazz musician I'd never heard of, just because the saxophone made me think of Chen Yu's headphones. And every Friday, he still came to dinner. He'd knock on the door and my mother would let him in, and we'd sit at a new kitchen table with new dishes and new jokes and new conversations. I didn't grow up overnight. I still had nightmares. I still had moments where I thought about that day on the bus stop. The rain, the feeling of being completely alone. But those moments got shorter, they came less often. And every time one came, I reminded myself of what I'd done, what I'd survived. I reminded myself that a girl with $20 ARs and no one to help her had faced down the people who tried to break her, and she'd won one day. I found a photograph in one of the moving boxes. It was my mother, Auntie May, and a young woman I didn't recognize. They were standing in a vineyard, all of them holding glasses of wine. I turned it over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 4 words. The beginning of everything. I framed that photograph and put it on my dresser, not because I understood it completely, but because it felt like a piece of a puzzle I was still figuring out. I was still figuring out a lot of things. What I wanted to be, who I wanted to become, where I wanted to go. But I wasn't afraid of the questions anymore. Idly ran that not knowing was okay. What mattered was the asking, the searching, the refusal to give up, and somewhere along the way, between the wedding and the move and the dinners and the quiet nights on the couch, I realized I wasn't the same person I'd been on that porch with the $20. I was braver, I was stronger, I was still scared, but I was okay with that. Being scared wasn't the opposite of being brave, it was the prerequisite. I tucked the $20 bill into the frame behind the photograph. It was folded small, just a corner peeking out. I never told anyone it was there. It was my secret, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. And every time I looked at it, I smiled. Because I knew that the girl who'd survived on $20 raws for 30 days had survived for a reason. She was me, and I was just getting steroided. 4 years passed like water through fingers. I turned 15 and then 16 and then 17. And somewhere along the way I stopped being the girl who counted coins under her mattress. I became someone else. Someone who took the bus to school without flinching at the stop where I'd first met Chen Yu. Someone who laughed at her mother's bad jokes and rolled her eyes at Auntie May's unsolicited advice. Someone who thought about the $20 AR bill less and less until it was just a folded piece of paper tucked behind a photograph, a relic of a past life. My mother's wine business grew. She'd stay rotted small after the dust settled. Just a few cases sold to local restaurants. But word spread fast, people liked her story. They liked that she'd fought back and won. She was interviewed by a local paper, and then a regional magazine, and suddenly she was being invited to speak at business conferences. She'd come home with free samples of wine and stories about the people she'd met. Her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen since before Europe. I went to high school like a normal kid. I made friends, real ones, the kind who came over to watch movies, and ate all my mother's snacks without asking. I got decent grades. I had a crush on a boy in my chemistry class named Marcus, who had a crooked smile and always forgot his lab goggles. He asked me to the winter formal and I said yes. And my mother cried when she saw me in the dress we'd picked out together. It was purple, my favorite color. And it made me feel like someone I didn't quite recognize. In a good way. Chen Yu was still around. He'd been promoted twice, made detective. And now he worked cases that he couldn't talk about at dinner. He'd come over on Fridays with takeout from the Thai place down the street, and he'd sit on the couch with his feet up and tell us about his coworkers and his crazy boss and the PA rocking ticket he'd fought for 3 weeks. He was Pierrot of our family now. That's just how it was. My mother didn't date anyone else. I don't think she wanted to, and if I'm being honest, I don't think she needed to. Chen Yu was there, and he was enough. But there was something I noticed that no one else seemed to see. It was in the way my mother looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. In the way she made his favorite meals without being asked. In the way her voice softened when she said his name. And it was in the way he looked at her too. A quiet kind of reverence that made me feel like I was intruding on something private. I never said anything. I didn't need to. Some things are better left unspoken. The summer I turned 18, my mother surprised me with a trip to the coast. We drove for 6 hours in her old sedan, the windows down and the radio playing songs neither of us knew the words to. She'd packed a COOler with sandwiches and fruit and bottles of water, and we ate lunch at a rest stop surrounded by pine trees and the distant sound of traffic. She told me about her childhood, growing up in a small town without much money, dreaming of a life that looked nothing like the one she'd ended up with. I listened and I felt like I was seeing her for the first time, not as my mother but as a person, someone with hopes and fears and regrets. When we got to the coast, the ocean stretched out before us like a promise. I stood on the sand and felt the water wash over my feet, and I thought about everything I'd been through. The $20, the wedding, the police, the years of rebuilding. It all felt so far away now, like a movie I'd watched a long time ago. Do you ever think about them? I asked my mother, Dad and Sue Wonking. She was standing beside me, her face tilted toward the sun. Sometimes, she said, not as much as I used to. What do you think about when you do? She was quiet for a moment. I think about how much time I wasted being scared of them. How much of my life I gave away trying to protect you from things that were always going to happen anyway. She turned to look at me, but I also think about how that fear made me stronger, how it led me here, how it led me back to you. I didn't have words for what I felt. I just leaned into her shoulder and let the sun arm my face. The next year I started college. I'd been accepted to a state school 2 hours away. And my mother drove me to the dorm herself. She ride boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining. And she helped me unpack my sheets and hang my posters and arrange my desk. We ate lunch in the dining hall, which was terrible, but she pretended to like it. When are you going to tell Chen Yu you love him? I asked. She choked on her soda. Excuse me, I'm not stupid, I said. I've seen the way you two look at each other. I've seen it for years. She wiped her mouth with a napkin and didn't meet my eyes. It's not that simple. It is that simple, I said. You're both adults. You're both single, and you're both clearly in love with each other. I leaned forward. What's stopping you? She was quiet for a long time. Then she sighed. I'm scared. Off what? Of losing him. She looked up at me. He's been there for us for so long. He's been the rock we needed when everything else was falling apart. If I say something and it changes things, if it makes it weird, then I lose him, and I can't lose him. Not him too. I reached across the table and took her hand. You won't lose him, I said. He's been waiting for you to say something for years. You can't seriously think he's just been coming to dinner every Friday for 5 years out of friendship. She laughed. It was a wet sound, like she was holding back tears. You're a little too smart for your own good. Probably. I agreed. But I'm also right. I hugged her goodbye at the door of my dorm, and she told me she was proud of me. I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed everything she said. Chen Yu proposed to my mother 6 months later. It was at dinner, a Friday dinner just like any other, except he had a ring hidden in a box of takeout. She opened it and screamed and cried and said yes before he even finished asking. I watched from the kitchen doorway, grinning so wide my cheeks hurt. It felt like the end of something, and the beginning of something all at once. They got a ride in the backyard of our new house. It was a small ceremony. Just me and Auntie May and a few close friends from the neighborhood. My mother wore a white dress that wasn't fancy but was perfect. Chen Yu wore a gray suit that matched his old hoodie. And he cried when he saw her walk down the aisle. I was the maid of honor. I held the flowers and I cried too, shameless. Like a faucet that wouldn't turn off. After the ceremony, we sat in the backyard and ate barbecue and drank lemonade. The sun was setting and everything was golden and warm. Auntie May got a little drunk and told embarrassing stories about my mother's youth. My mother pretended to be mortified but she was laughing too hard to really stop her. Chen Yu just sat there with his arm around my mother's shoulder, looking at her like she was the entire universe. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I found my mother on the porch swing. She was alone, staring up at the stars. I sat down beside her. Happy, I asked. She said. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. You deserve it. I leaned my head on her shoulder. You deserve all of it. She put her arm around me. Shoo. You deserve everything. I graduated college 2 years later. I'd studied business, P.A. Rotley because of my mother and P.A. Rotley because I had a knack for numbers that had Sta rotted with counting coins on a couch. I got a job at a small Mamet racquetting firm and I moved into my own apartment, a tiny studio with a window that faced a brick wall. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I paid my own rent, and bought my own groceries and lived my own life. It felt strange at first, being completely responsible for myself, but I got used to it. Chen Yu and my mother came to visit every other Sunday. They'd bring leftovers and wine and gossip about the neighbors. I'd make coffee and we'd sit around my cramped living room and talk for hours. Sometimes Auntie May would come too, and we'd play cards or watch old movies or just sit and be together. I looked at them. These people who'd become my family in the most unexpected way, and I felt a gratitude so deep it hurt. I started dating, nothing serious at first, Just dinners and movies and the occasional walk in the park. I was I'd around rally that not everyone you trusted deserved that trust, but I was also. I didn't want to let my past close me off to the future. I met Leo at a friend's PA. He was tall and quiet and had a laugh that made everyone around him smile. We talked for hours that night, about books and movies, and the kinds of dreams we'd tucked away for safekeeping. He asked me out the next week, and I said yeah. And then he asked me out again, and I said yes again. And before I knew it, he was a regular part of my life. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He did it on the coast, the same beach my mother and I had visited years ago. He'd brought a picnic, and a bottle of wine, and a ring that spiraled in the fading sunlight. I said yes before he finished asking. I cried. I always cried at the important moments. My mother cried too when I told her. She hugged me so hard I thought I'd break, and Chen Yu shook Leo's hand with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. We had the wedding at the same house where my mother had Mue ride Chen Yu. It was a year later in spring, when the flowers were blooming and the air was soft and warm. I wore a dress that my mother had helped me pick out, and I walked down the aisle to a jazz song that Leo had picked out, a saxophone melody that reminded me of bus stops and gray hoodies and the kindness of strangers. Leo held my hands at the altar and I looked into his eyes and I didn't think about $20 bills or empty apartments or police cars. I thought about the future. I thought about the life we were going to build together. I thought about the family I already had and the family we were going to create, and I smiled for real this time. The kind of smile that doesn't have to hide anything. After the wedding, we went on a honeymoon. Nuff, just a cabin in the mountains with no cell service and a porch overlooking a lake. We spent a week reading books and cooking bad meals and swimming in water that was way too cold. It was the best week of my life. 6 months after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. I told Leo at dinner, and he dropped his fork and stared at me with his mouth hanging open. Then he started laughing, and then he was crying. And then we were both crying and laughing at the same time. It was the most beautiful mess I'd ever seen. My mother was ecstatic. She started buying baby clothes before I even hit the second trimester. Little onesies and tiny socks, and a stuffed elephant that she insisted would be the baby's favorite toy. She set up the nursery in my spare room while Leo and I were at work, painted it a soft yellow and hung mobiles from the ceiling. When the baby came, a girl with a wail that could wake the dead. My mother was in the delivery room with me. Leo was on my other side, holding my hand so tight my fingers went numb. My mother was crying and I was crying. And the nurse was telling us to calm down, and the baby just kept screaming. It was chaos, it was perfect. I named her Lily. It was the name my mother had wanted for me, but my father had insisted on something else. I told my mother that it was time someone got to be Lily. She cried again when I told her. She was always crying, but I didn't mind. I was crying too. Lily was born on a rainy Tuesday, and when they put her in my arms, I looked at her tiny face and her clenched fists and her pink, scrunched up, and I felt like the world had shifted. I felt like I understood something I hadn't understood before, something about love and sacrifice and the terrifying, beautiful weight of having someone depend on you completely. I thought about my own mother, standing on the porch with a $20 bill, telling me she'd be back in a month. I thought about how brave she'd been, even when she was scared. I thought about how she'd left not to abandon me, but to save me. And I thought about how I'd done the same thing, in my own small way all those years ago. I looked at Lily and I whispered, "I'll never leave you." And I meant it with every part of me. My mother moved into our building when Lily turned 1. She said it was to help with childcare, but I knew it was because she couldn't stand being away from her granddaughter. Chen Yu came with her, of course. He'd taken a desk job at the department, less dangerous, more time at home. He'd say he was just tired of chasing bad guys, but I knew he'd done it for them, for his family. We had dinners together almost every night, the 3 of us and Leo, and Lily in her high chair, banging her spoon on the tray. We'd eat and talk and laugh, and sometimes I'd look around the table and think about how far we'd all come. How a little girl with $20 had grown into a woman with a husband and a daughter, and a family that wasn't perfect but was hers. And on the anniversary of the day my mother left, I'd pull out that $20 bill from behind the photograph and hold it in my hands. I'd think about the girl who'd counted those coins on the couch, who'd opened the door to police officers and swallowed her FAR, and faced down the people who'd tried to break her. I'd think about how that girl had survived, how she'd thrived, how she'd become someone her younger self would have been proud of. I'd fold the bill back up and put it away, and I'd go back to my life. The life I'd built from nothing, the life that was mine, and I'd smile, because I knew the best was still yet to come.